Continues.
And in the wake of the recent controversy over J.D. Vance's past comments about prominent Democratic women, our next guest, Sophia Nelson, wrote this column in the Atlantic Journal-Constitution. The headline, "The Childless Cat Ladies Would Like a Word." What did you want to say?
Listen, I'm not a cat lady. I like dogs, but I don't have children. And the purpose of the article was to, Childless Chicks, which is my PAC, that's kind of a pushback with a little bit of a wink and nod. But this issue of people being childless is a very serious one. There are some 22 million women in the United States of childbearing age who don't have children. When you get to post 40, that number drops to about 15 million. So that's a significant number of women and men in this country who either can't have children or choose not to have children. And I wanted J.D. Vance to understand that this isn't a joke. It isn't a laughing matter. Reproductive freedom and reproductive health is a big issue in this campaign. And to take a swipe at those of us who were unable to have children and say we are not full citizens or we shouldn't be able to participate at the same level is it's inappropriate for a U.S. Senator. It's unkind, and it's not something that I think holds him in good stead with the women of America.
Childless Chicks is your PAC, as you said. What's a PAC? What does it do? How many people are involved?
A political action committee is, anybody can start one. Again, me being a creature of Washington and understanding how these things work, I wanted an official PAC. You raise money and you can donate to a campaign or campaigns. In this instance, I set it up so that we could donate to the Harris campaign and support her, as many coalitions are doing, as you know, across the country. You've got Black Women for Harris, who, by the way, started kind of this whole thing off with the call, and then it was white dudes for Harris, and it was Black men for Harris, and Latinas and Asians, and now you've got the Cat Ladies and the Childless Chicks, and you've got, a group of coalitions that really have brought this country together in ways that I've really never seen before.
How much have you fundraised so far?
We're going to do a big fundraiser. We just got approved and set up, websites up, childlesschicks4harris.org, and we're going to do a big push and a big national call probably in early September. We're working on it now.
You said you've been around Washington a long time. What have you done in D.C.?
Well, I've been on this show. Isn't this like my 10th time or something like that?
This will be your 10th time, according to the C-SPAN archives.
Yeah, the first time I was on was 1998 when I was a young committee counsel working right over there on the House side in the Rayburn building, and Dan Burton was chairman of my committee at that time, Government Reform and Oversight. So I've been around a long time. I interned in the Senate when I was in college in the 80s, the late 80s, and, done internships and all kind of things here. I've been coming here a long time.
And joining us this morning with phone lines split, as usual, by political party. If you want to talk to Sophia Harris, if you want to talk about her PAC, Childless Chicks for Harris, it's 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans. Independents, it's 202-748-8002. And we'll, of course, look for your text messages and your emails as well. You can get in touch with us on social media. I want to talk about the Childless Chicks women's role more specifically in campaign 2024. It was House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik who was trying to make the point earlier this month that Donald Trump has been very good for the women of this country, and when it comes to their economics and their income in this country. She said the median income for women increased every year during the Trump administration, reaching the highest on record in 2020. Real average weekly earnings increased 8.2% under President Trump. It decreased 3.9% under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. She goes on to say the unemployment rate for women overall and for Black women in particular reached a record low during President Trump's term. In 2019, the workforce participation gap between men and women shrank to the narrowest in history. President Trump's economy made history with the most women in the workforce ever.
So I'm not an economist, and I don't have the ability to fact check in real time as I would want to do. I think that if the Biden-Harris folks were on here, they would take exception to everything she said, in point of fact, he's had the lowest unemployment. You have to remember that during Trump's presidency, particularly 20 and into, that whole year, the later part, COVID was raging, and that caused shutdowns of businesses, lockdowns, et cetera, et cetera. So the economy began to tank anyway in that last year. And then as Biden came in, they were in what you call the recovery as more people got the vaccines, et cetera. So I would argue that Elise Stefanik is not someone that I consider a neutral source. She's very partisan. And so again, I want to be kind and charitable on C-SPAN, but I would want to fact check that. I don't agree that that's the case. I think women in particular have done much better under Biden and Harris on a number of markers. As an African-American woman who owns a small business and have for the last 15 years, I can tell you that there are a lot more incentives and programs and things to help. A lot of people took those PPP loans. I wish I did. I didn't. I didn't know they weren't going to make you pay it back. But I think that there are a lot of growth opportunities, and I think that this administration has been very focused on diversity and how we come together and use it as a strength and not a weakness, and not attacking people of color and particularly black women, which Trump is pretty famous for doing. So.
Plenty of calls for you already this morning. Up first, Milton in Baltimore, line for Democrats. Milton, go ahead. You're on with Sophia Nelson.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Morning. I wanted to kind of talk about the economy, being that the last guy was on was about talking about economy. And as far as not going back to the Trump economy that he had when he was president, what I wanted to say and lead up to the question is that it seems that going back all the way back to Reagan, every time that we have a Republican president, they pass off the economy, and America's crashing, falling through the floor, and pass it off to a Democrat. When the Democrat fixes it, like Obama and Joe Biden, then they have 2-3 years of good economy piggybacking off of what the Democrat has done. But when crises strike again under their watch, it falls apart again. And then they want to come in after the economy is good and say, oh, we did this, and take credit for what the Democrat president has done. So my question is, why can't we somehow make that the focus as to another reason why we can't go back, why we're not going back to a Republican, especially Donald Trump, who can't handle crisis?
No, we'll take the point. Sophia Nelson.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not an economist, but I think common sense dictates that Republicans and Democrats fundamentally see tax policy very differently. Republicans believe in, for lack of a better word, trickle down, right? I'm going to give the richest people tax cuts, or the people in the corporate structure. Thus, I will free up more wealth, more money. It will trickle down into jobs. It will increase revenue, da-da-da. The Democrats don't see it that way. The Democrats believe if I help the middle class and the working folks, and I cut and I give child tax credits, et cetera, and I put more money back in the hands of the people, then they will spend more, and they will buy more homes, and they will build things, and they will send their kids to schools, and et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a fundamental difference in the way the two parties look at economics and how they play out. And that has been consistent since Reagan, for sure.
Steve Moore was just on this program. He gave the case against the child tax cuts, his concerns about it. Where are you on the child tax cuts and expanding it?
I mean, this country's got to get serious. You know, Nikki Haley said, and she's right, Trump had the biggest deficit of any president in the last, going back to Reagan, $8 trillion was added. Now, you can argue, as Steve tried to do, that it was because of COVID and I'm going to take it out, and he was dancing around the facts. The facts are Republican presidents have had higher deficits, okay? So when you get to the place of whether or not we are going to be able to, as a country, deal with this issue of tax policy and child tax cuts, why would you say that?
And I guess child tax credit is the
child
proper
tax
term.
credits, not tax cuts, tax credits, kind of the same, right? But if you give a family that has 4 kids, you know, $2,500 a kid or $4,000 a kid, that's going to make a fundamental impact on that family's bottom line. But if you give Jeff Bezos of Amazon or any one of these corporate guys who are making trillions and billions, and they're paying, you know, in some cases, what is it, 5%, 10% of taxes? There's something fundamentally wrong with that, guys. So let's get honest as Americans and start telling the truth and stop playing games.
And we come to Washington, D.C. This is Adam, line for Republicans. Adam, good morning. You're on with Sophia Nelson.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Cynthia. Thanks for having me. I'm just curious on your perspective on, and when I think objectively, I watch the left and the message that they push, and the left purports to be the party of unity, but yet when I listen in on talk shows or listen in on speeches, I see a lot of, I identity politics that come into play. And for example, as I think you mentioned, and I'm just curious, why is that? Thank you.
So he calls it identity politics. I would call it coalitions. And I think that the reason you see the Black Women for Harris is because, let's start with that, because they were really the catalyst for all the calls that followed in the coalitions, was because we all understood, and I was on that call, that Kamala Harris being the first female vice president and the first female of color vice president, and possibly the next president, first woman of color, she was going to need support in a way that's a little bit different because she is a person of color. I think one of the problems that my Republicans, and everybody knows I was a Republican for a very long, long time. It's the only party I've ever belonged to. I'm an independent now. I'm a never Trumper and will be till the day I die. But I think that, when I hear this identity politics, that says straw man. The reality is America is diverse. America has many different people and many different coalitions. So we are a nation of different people with different positions and different thoughts. And those things do matter in our day-to-day lives, and they come into play in our politics and how we are treated and the opportunities that we have. And my hope is that I love Republicans for Harris. It's one of my favorite groups because I really was proud of Jeff and Olivia and Adam and all the people that spoke at great peril to themselves and to their families and to their careers. And they said, I'm putting country over party. So they are a coalition as well. Is it identity politics because Republicans are supporting Harris? Of course, it's a group of people who are not normally supportive of a Democrat, who are because they like her ideas and her vision. And
maybe we buried that lead as a longtime journalist on your party identity. When did you make that decision to become an independent and walk us through that?
The moment that Donald Trump became the official nominee and became...
Who were you supporting in 2016?
Hillary Clinton, which was hard for me. I like and respect Hillary Clinton, but I worked on the Hill and did those investigations and, back when Clinton was president. And
I meant in the Republican primary.
Oh, in the Republican in 2016? I think I liked probably Marco Rubio, or anybody but Trump would have probably been acceptable. And then I think about people like Lindsey Graham, who I used to respect, who was very clear that if Trump took over the Republican Party, he would destroy it and they would deserve what they got. Boy, are his words coming true. And so for me, that process was, this is really a Trump-driven thing for me and a lot of people like me. So now we're politically homeless. Independent, which is kind of a no man's land at this point. But I do think that the Republican Party after this election, particularly if Trump loses, I think that it's in a lot of trouble because it's a shrinking party. It's very white, it's very monolithic, it's very regional in its demographics of the kind of people that support it. It's not growing, it's not expanding in a nation that is more diverse, more female, and changing.
Let me take you to line 4 independents. This is Tom in Garrison, Minnesota. Good morning to the land of 10,000 lakes. Go ahead.
Yeah, inside the Beltway, what has happened to the, let's call them the Republicans that were the anybody but Trumpers? They're all out here in the hinterlands, but inside the Beltway, have they been pretty much eliminated from the scene?
That's a great question, and yes, the people who have not fallen in line with Trump I'm one of them. They've been exiled, for lack of a better word. The party has a deep division. You saw it in this last primary where Nikki Haley was the last woman standing. Trump didn't even show up for one of the Republican debates, which I thought was very disrespectful. If you want to win the primary of your party, you need to show up and debate and show up to the caucuses and the primaries. And you know, it was disheartening for me to see Nikki Haley, after saying everything she said about Trump and being very firm, she wouldn't support him, and how he talked about military families and when her husband was deployed, and she was pretty clear, and then she flipped and ended up falling in line. And the reason she did that is because if she wants a future in whatever the Republican Party becomes post-2024, she's got to be able to say that, yeah, I campaigned against him, I ran against him, but I fell back in line. And that's a sad place. Look at people like Mitch McConnell, who could have really made sure that we were never dealing with what we are now. They could have, you know, convicted him after January 6th and made sure he never returned to politics again in the Senate trial. Mitch McConnell votes to not convict, but then gives this scathing speech on the floor of the Senate about Trump being criminally liable and basically that he did all of it and he was responsible for it. that's the kabuki theater that the Republican Party is right now. It's sad.
You mentioned the caucuses. Let's head to Iowa. Davenport, this is Jack, line for Democrats. Good morning. You're on with Sophia Nelson.
Good morning.
Morning.
The 16th Amendment to the Constitution says Congress can tax income. Kamala Harris wants to tax raw wealth. Now, Kamala is a trained lawyer. Do you think she doesn't know that that proposal is clearly unconstitutional?
And Jack, as you're calling in on our line for Democrats, you don't plan to vote for Kamala Harris, or is this just one issue for you?
I like Bobby Kennedy, but I'm a little concerned when her proposals flim-flam.
And Jack, what did you think of RFK Jr. Endorsing Trump?
I was startled by the concern about children's health, and I think Bobby's got something there. I'm that obesity thing and food stuff, and I want to consider what Bobby was talking about.
What do you think, if Donald Trump were to win, do you think he would have a spot in a Trump administration? And if so, what do you think it would be?
I hope it would be about health.
Sophia Nelson, a couple issues there.
Yeah, I have no comment. Again, I'm not an economist. I have no idea what proposal he's talking about with her taxing raw wealth. I don't know what that is, so I can't really give an answer to that. But I would, with the RFK situation, listen, I think when your family comes out publicly against you, a storied family, a storied Democrat family like the Kennedys are, and says the things that they've put in writing about their own sibling, the hitting of the bear, the womanizing, and all the other things that have come out about him, the brain worms, the cutting off the heads of whales or sharks with a chainsaw, one of his kids said. Yeah, I don't know about RFK. I'm just going to say prayers for him and wish him the best.
Back to Minnesota. This is Derek in Lakeland in the land of lakes. Independent, good morning.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Good morning, America. I have a couple comments and one question. My first comment is, it's really funny. Only in American politics does somebody at 60 years old is referred to as a fresh face. That being said, you said you're a creature of Washington, D.C. I'd like to thank you and our current vice president for not having children. My next point is...
I'll tell you what, we'll stop you there, Derek. Sophia Nelson, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on it. I think that, again, this is why I formed the Childless Chicks for Harris PAC. I think, again, reproductive health and freedom is a core issue in this campaign, mostly around abortion rights. I am a pro-life, center-right, used to be Republican, Christian. And even I recognize that there is a problem when women who are having a miscarriage and having other challenges can't get reproductive care at the ER and they bleed out. You've seen the stories, you've heard the stories of couples and people who struggled with IVF, they finally get pregnant and then they have a miscarriage and they can't even get treatment, which may then lead to infertility if they don't get the proper treatment. And so I think that this kind of unkindness is what bothers me, this nastiness to say thank you, and Kamala Harris, by the way, is how you say her name. Kamala is how you say it. And to suggest that somehow the world is a better place because we couldn't bring children into it is just, it's awful, it's mean, it's nasty, and it's, having been in Washington for a long time and done this show many times, I've never heard the kind of nastiness that we've seen since Donald Trump came on the scene. I'm going to be very direct. It's why I will never support him. It's why I am deeply disappointed in my country that a person with 34 felonies and everything else he has going on can actually run for the presidency. In my state, he can't vote as a convicted felon of Virginia. You can't vote. And so I think that we've got to do better, and I think that that's why Vice President Harris and Governor Walz have had these rallies and the support, why you have 100,000 Republicans for Harris on a call and speaking at the convention. It's contagious. People are sick and tired of the nasty doom, gloom, unkindness, and incivility towards one another. And that caller just gave you a glimpse of it.
Who do you think, which Republican who spoke at the Democratic convention gave the best pitch to try to win over Republicans for Harris?
I thought that Jeff Duncan of Georgia, former lieutenant governor, and Adam Kinzinger were both amazing. I mean, Olivia and everybody was great, but they really, I think Kinzinger and Duncan are the future leaders of whatever ends up happening after. I do think people like Glenn Youngkin in my state of Virginia, although he has supported Trump, I guess, I'll say in a probably a way in which he has to as a sitting Republican governor of a state like Brian Kemp and others. When you hear people talk privately about how many of these Republicans really feel about Trump, it's very different, right? But I do think that those guys and Nikki Haley and others will try to salvage something and turn it into something. But I think that Adam and Jeff will have a hard time going back, as would I, to what the Republican Party is now. So I thought they both did an amazing job saying there's no shame in voting for Vice President Harris. She's got common sense. She's not dangerous. She's not going to overthrow democracy. And I think for most of us, we want this republic, you know, we're going to be 250 years old in 2026. We want this republic to stand another 250 years after all of us are well gone. And we want it to keep going, and we want it to be free, and we want it to be the greatest story ever told, as Vice President Harris said.
We talked about, or asked a viewer about if Donald Trump wins and RFK Jr. If Donald Trump loses, what happens? Who's the leadership of the Republican Party that you see? And I'm not saying what happens immediately after or January 6th of 2025.
Well, I just
what happens
led
in
into
4
that.
years? Yeah.
I mean, I think that you see the positioning now. Again, it all depends on whether he wins or loses. When he loses, and I'm saying right now, I think he's going to lose, and I actually think he's going to lose. I don't think it's going to be a squeaker. I think she's going to win pretty handily. I think this is the Obama coalition that's reborn in 2024 with very different demographics. Some 44 million people have been added, you know, since that time, right, to the voter rolls. Your demographics, you've lost your greatest generation. Your baby boomers are, you know, getting up into their 80s now. So I think for the Republicans, as I said, I gave you some names.
What happens to a Mike Johnson or the Freedom Caucus?
I think that the Trump MAGA is going to have to be put down, for lack of a better way to say it. And what I mean by that is it has lost continuously 2018, 19, 20, 22. Just look at the numbers. Trump has been a disaster for Republicans at the ballot box. And I think that wing is there's going to be a civil war, if you will. There's going to be a fight for the soul. I think people like Brian Kemp and, again, Nikki Haley and Glenn Youngkins and those people are your ideally 2028 candidates if he loses. But I don't know. There's going to be a big fight about it. Trump's not going to go away if he loses, by the way. He's just not.
Mary in South Carolina, line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Ms. Nelson? I'm so excited that I'm on the phone with you because you have a larger platform than I do. I've been out there as much as I can letting people know about this documentary on Donald Trump. It's called Bad Faith. Once you watch that documentary, you would understand what we're going through and what we're fighting for. We're fighting for our freedom. This documentary, nobody should watch it alone. It's on YouTube. John, you can check to make sure it's still on YouTube. And I know it's on Tubi. You can watch it for free there. This documentary has Fox on it. It has MSNBC on it.
And is this a documentary about Christian nationalism, Mary?
That's it, honey, Bad Faith. That's it, Christian nationalism. And this is what we're against, John. I know Donald Trump. I have my experience with Donald Trump. Donald Trump has hurt so many people, and I'm tired of him. I want him gone. I want him out of the system of politics because, like she said, civil war, oh, yeah, we're going to have a civil war. That's what they want.
So, Mary, thank you for your call. And I can tell you're very passionate about this. And South Carolina is my second home away from home. We have a place out on the coast of the Isle of Palms, and I love it there. It's a beautiful state. So thank you for your call. But I would say this, that I will watch the documentary. I'm very familiar with Christian nationalism and with the white nationalist movement. There was a report in the news over the last couple of days that the Secret Service revealed that there was a white nationalist supremacist attempt they wanted to take out President Obama, and the FBI was involved, and a very big deal that I don't think has gotten enough attention. I happened to be dating a Secret Service agent at that time very seriously, and I remember him telling me about, being surprised at the level of racism and racist threats that they saw that would come in against President Obama. He got a lot more threats than the normal president, of course, being the first black one, no surprise. I say all that to say that I think that this country is at an inflection point. And President Biden, God bless him, I met him when I was a Senate intern back in 1989. And if someone had told me then he was going to be president in his 80s and I would be 50s, I would have laughed at you. But here it is. And I say God bless him because he had the courage to step back in and say, after Charlottesville, that he felt this country was headed in a wrong direction and that he wanted to do something about it. And he ends up being a one-termer. I think history will treat him kindly. But I think that Vice President Harris has her work cut out for her as a woman and as a woman of color, uniting this country in this kind of climate. I do think we are deeply divided. I do worry that her race and her gender, it's kind of what they called back in the day the Bradley effect. Tom Bradley, mayor of Los Angeles, first black mayor, and Doug Wilder in Virginia. People would say they were voting for them, but they really didn't when they got to the ballot box. And you see this with black candidates. It happens. People were worried it might happen with Obama. It didn't. Hopefully it doesn't happen with Harris. But, there are people who know that it's politically not correct to say they're supporting Trump, if you will, because of everything that he's done in January 6th, but they will vote for him anyway. So I think this country has a very serious race problem, and we have got to talk about it, and we have got to come together, which is why I'm really excited about these coalitions for Vice President Harris. Trump doesn't have that going on. Harris does. That's a good sign.
You mentioned a deeply divided country. It's been a couple of years, but you wrote E Pluribus I, Reclaiming Our Founders' Vision for a United America. How do we do that in 2024 or 2025?
Well, thank you for that. And C-SPAN had me on. We talked about it on Book TV when I wrote that book. But I think that getting back to our core principles is, I want to say this to the people who support Trump and the MAGA, et cetera, people who feel like your country has left you or it has forgotten you. I think you need to be heard as well. And I think that we need to, again, have dialogues about these difficult issues, these conversations we need to have around race, diversity, equity, and inclusion, around the economy, around the rural economy versus an urban economy, around healthcare, around taxes, around what there should be tax reform. I'm an old Jack Kemp type girl where I believe that we should have a flat tax. And I believe that, if we had one rate across the board and people making 40 and under shouldn't pay any taxes, you would see an amazing growth and you would see a lot less burden of government regulation, if you will, on your paycheck, right? And I think people feel that, and I think we should acknowledge that. I think answering your question, part of the problem is you've got left and you've got right, but most of us sit in the center. If you look at any voting breakout of the 50% that just don't vote in this country, sadly, and you look at how people are registered, more than 50% of Americans register as independents. So that means that the Republicans are about 30 or less, the Democrats are about 30 or less, and the rest of us sit right here. And we are the ones that need to move this country forward and change the dialogue and change the dynamics in our politics. And until we do, we're going to stay just as bitterly divided as we are right now.
For viewers who want more on E Pluribus I, it was on our Afterwards program on Book TV. Sophia Nelson interviewed by a man by the name of Michael Steele.
One of my dearest friends, former Republican National Committee Chairman, former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, great America.
Stephen, out on Long Island, Republican. Good morning.
So my thing is this. On the issue of taxes and everything else, it costs millions of dollars even to build a small farm today and run a small farm, not to mention a manufacturing business or any other kind of business. It costs over $1 million. So when people say they want to tax the rich, they're taxing those millions of dollars that it was to build those businesses. If you take that money and put it in other countries in the world, you're guaranteed an income by those countries to put the money there in their bank accounts, rather than invest in farms or anything else. And this is what the problem with the Harris administration, what she wants to do, will cause. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, my response to that would be, I think he, needs to understand economics a little better. And one of one of the things that will help farms and others is you got to get rid of burdensome regulation. So on that's where my conservative Republican horns come out, and I'm pretty firm on that footing. But I think that tax cuts, et cetera, are not the issue with farms. Farms need subsidies, as you know, in order to make it, because they can't compete against the bigger food manufacturers, the bigger corporations, et cetera. So the small farms in this country, and the black farmers, as you know, just won, what, a $2 billion settlement that had been in the works for a long time. My good friend Ben Crump was the attorney for them and helped with that. And, you know, it is a real challenge on how we treat farmers in this country, and we need to have better policy around that. That's an agricultural policy issue.
We don't have to stick to just farms. What are the biggest burdensome regulations in this country that could be cut today?
Well, you know, you think about things like, I think the big fight of our time is going to be what the minimum wage should be, for example, right? And if you're a small business owner, you say, if you impose on me a $20 an hour minimum wage, I can't afford to run my business, even if I'm a Starbucks or whatever, because that $20 an hour really cuts into my profit margin, my cost, my this, that. On the flip side, if you're the consumer and you work, you and I both know that you can't live on $7 an hour. If you work 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week at $7 an hour, you're still not making any money, and you're still being taxed on that, which goes back to my point about tax policy having to be integral with regulatory policy, et cetera. Like, they all have to kind of be done at the same time. They have to be in tandem. So I think that the biggest burdensome regulation at the moment is this fight over the prevailing minimum wage and what it will be, because that is something, as you saw, both President Trump, former President Trump, and Vice President Harris want to eliminate the tips tax, right? And that would be very helpful too, because people have to actually, if they made $50 in tips, they have to actually put that into their taxes, and then they get taxed on it, which is a problem because you're getting it in cash, and it gets into people reporting. It's just a nightmare. They need to leave it alone. But I think the biggest burdensome regulation I can mention that people relate to is this minimum wage issue. And it does have to go up because people can't live on $7 or $10, $15 an hour. But can you impose $20, $25 an hour on a small business? Depending on what it is, can they sustain it? And most will do layoffs or shut down and say, no, I can't.
Sounds like you fall somewhere between 15 and 20?
Yep, probably about there.
Just less than 10 minutes left with Sophia Nelson this morning. Taking your phone calls. We'll head to the Garden State in Hamilton, New Jersey. It's Mark, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well. You're on with Sophia Nelson. Go ahead.
Hey, Mark.
Yes. Good morning. You speak very well. I could listen to you all day.
Oh, you're kind. I grew up in New Jersey, by the way. I grew up in South Jersey, exit 3.
Exit 3.
You're a Jersey girl.
I am.
All right. First of all, what do you think of the Project 2025 thing that is going around? The hatred thing you brought up is true. I'm sorry for that comment that person made. I understand the hatred thing. I have an identical twin brother who won't even speak to me. He's got a Trump flag out in front of the house, and you know what? I'm not a hatred person. I don't want to deal with any of that. And the other thing, how can a person who's a criminal run for president? I will never understand this, how this is even allowed. I just don't understand it. But that is all my comments.
Mark, I wrote down your questions so we can get back to them. But can you just tell me, at what point did you and your identical twin diverge on your political identity, your political beliefs? Do you remember specifically when it happened?
This did not start until he lost the 2020 race. Yes.
Were you and he both supporters of Donald Trump, or?
No. Oh, I'm sorry. I was. In 2016, I was saying he was so great for the first 2 years. But you know what? If you have a brain up in the top of your head and you see what goes on and what comes out of his mouth, you smarten up.
That's Mark in New Jersey. I've got the questions written down for you.
I got it. I'm good.
What do you want to comment on? So
let me kind of start with first just saying thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. I love C-SPAN. And folks, support, because it's a worthwhile and very important public service company, I believe, that we all need. Project 2025 is a thing. no matter how much Trump says he doesn't know anything about it, it's extreme, he has nothing to do with it, the facts have borne out that his vice presidential nominee wrote the foreword for the book. So that kind of speaks for itself, right? You don't really need to go any further than that. It is a manifesto of the way that conservatives, and we're talking arch conservatives now, the Heritage Foundation is as conservative as you get. These folks have been there for a very long time, and they have a very different view of America than does another more left organization or even those of us who sit in the center. And I think that we should pay attention to it, number one. With respect to the Trump family feud stuff, we all have it in our families. I don't think there's one of us who doesn't have a relative, and I have at least one or two that I do not like to talk about Trump with them. I don't want to talk about politics with them because you cannot engage in a civil way with them. They're just on another level. I personally think it's a cult. I feel that way. I tweet that way all the time. I think it is something that I've never seen before in this country, that people follow this man, particularly Christians who I know to be moral, good people, who I know, and they follow a man who's one of the most immoral humans I've ever seen, objectively. So I feel for him, and the best thing I can say is I hope that they can find their way back to each other, but trying to have that conversation is useless. I've done it. It's not worth it. On the issue of what else did he have there?
I think the last one was a criminal running for president. It's a topic that's come up, and we talk about what's in the Constitution of what the requirements are for somebody to be president, and not being a criminal is not one of those.
Listen, the founders didn't foresee this. They just didn't, because in their logic, in their wisdom, particularly as it pertains to someone who was a former president, the impeachment clause is there for exactly the reason it's there. If you engage in high crimes and misdemeanors or other inappropriate conduct for the executive under Article 2, then the Senate and the House of Representatives has the right and the ability to remove you, to deal with you, to whatever they need to do to make sure you don't ever hold office again. I don't think any of the founders ever foresaw a Donald Trump, because in their common sense, who would elect? You know, John Adams talks about the importance of morality in civic leadership and that moral and virtuous government. I wrote about this in E Pluribus. And we've gotten away from that model, which is a whole nother show for another day. But let me just say that back to Childless Chicks, PAC. Folks, this election is probably going to be the most consequential, definitely, of our lifetimes. We're going to make a decision about where we're going to go. And I think the way we treat each other needs to be a centerpiece of what we look at, because the way we treat each other now is not very respectful or very civil or very decent and in order. And again, we saw that with a caller that would actually call and say to another human being who wanted children so much the way I did and could not have them, not through my choice, but because of biology and fate. And it's something that's a sore subject to this day. It's still a painful thing. And I don't know Vice President Harris's story about why she didn't have biological children, but she's a stepmom. And to somehow say that if you're a stepmom or a bonus mom that you're less than, or because I didn't have children, but I've got wonderful nieces that I adore and was blessed to have in my life, that somehow I'm less than, or that we shouldn't participate in our government is just, again, it's a level of discourse I've never seen before, and I'm concerned about it. So I hope that we will do better by one another and respect our differences and our different viewpoints, and still be able to have a drink and share coffee or have a glass of wine and find those things that unite us, because there's a lot more that we have in common, even when we disagree on some things, than not.
Let me give you one more call in the 2 minutes we have left. This is Leon, Flint, Michigan, a fellow independent of yours. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I would just like to make a comment on how everyone keeps saying that Donald Trump is a felon. Felonies are not tried in district court.
This guy's just wrong. He's a felon. He's a convicted felon. And felons are tried in any court that has jurisdiction. I'm a lawyer. Where you've committed a crime, there are Class A misdemeanors, there are Class A felonies, there are Class B felonies, whether it's in general court, district court, the federal court for white-collar crime, etc., the Department of Justice, corporate crime. And so, yes, he is a convicted felon. And again, this gets back to what I said about this mindset that's not, it's not level, it's not right. they don't deal in facts. Donald Trump is a convicted felon, and he's going to be sentenced, I think, in a couple weeks, because Judge Merchan decided he wasn't going to wait till after the election, as he should not. In fact, had I done what Trump did or you did, we'd probably be in jail awaiting sentencing if we couldn't post our bond, which I assume was significant in this case, to not have to go to jail and wait till you were sentenced. And be out on your OR. So, you know, I'm tired of that kind of, that's deceptive and not truthful. He is a felon, and I'm sorry that people can't deal with that.
Sophia Nelson is the founder of Childless Chicks for Harris PAC. If viewers want to find out more about it, what can they do? childlesschicksforharris.org. It's an unaffiliated PAC, so it is a PAC that you can donate to, and we will send those funds over to the Harris Walls campaign. It's not a part of the Harris campaign. Appreciate your time, your 10th appearance on C-SPAN. We'll see you back here for 11 down the road.
You bet.
About 30